A high school teacher is facing serious charges after police say she sexually abused a 16-year-old student. The teacher also allegedly gave the teenager marijuana more than a dozen times, according to investigators. Law enforcement officials say the alleged abuse took place over several months. Prosecutors have now filed 63 felony charges against her. She's also reportedly at risk of losing her job while the school district conducts its own investigation. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the charges, what investigators say happened, and what's next in the case. A trusted Pennsylvania teacher is accused of abusing her position in the classroom. Michelle Mercogliano, a special education teacher at Conestoga High School, is being investigated after allegedly having sex with a 16-year-old student. According to a criminal complaint obtained by Law&Crime, investigators say the sexual relationship began in February. Police were alerted after the minor's family contacted authorities. The complaint states the student told police they had sex approximately a dozen times. Mercogliano is also accused of providing the teen with marijuana on at least 15 occasions. Investigators allege the teacher used her cell phone to communicate with the student and the social media app Snapchat to try and avoid detection. The complaint also claims that some of the interactions took place at Mercogliano's parents' home. According to the school district, Mercogliano began teaching at Conestoga High School last fall. Prior to that, she taught at an elementary school from 2019 to 2024 and at another school from 2014 to 2018. Mercogliano is facing 63 felony charges, including institutional sexual assault, corruption of minors, and delivery of a controlled substance. The school district says she was immediately placed on leave and no longer has access to school property. The superintendent also stated that at this time, there is no information indicating the investigation involves any other students. The Chester County District Attorney said in a statement, quote, "Parents and students should be able to trust their teachers. The defendant broke the law and destroyed that trust. It will not be tolerated." Trade a Friend Township Police Chief Michael Beatty called the allegations, quote, "shocking and disturbing," adding, "We are here to support the victim and his family as we collectively work to rebuild the trust damaged by her criminal endeavors." According to the DA's office, Mercogliano has not yet been arraigned but is cooperating with authorities. Officials say she is working through her attorney to arrange a time to turn herself in. And joining me to talk more about this is criminal defense attorney Matt Mangino. Matt, thank you so much for coming on today. Let's just jump right in. The suspect is facing 63 charges. Can you just break down why so many? Is this something the prosecution does just to make sure that a lot of them stick?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are charges for each one of the encounters between the teacher and the juvenile students. So there's institutional sexual assault, there's sexual assault, there's endangering the welfare of a child. So when you start to multiply those by 12 different encounters, and I think there might have even been more times where she had furnished marijuana allegedly to this student. So when you start adding all those up, you get to a big number.
How many years is the suspect facing?
Well, each one of these counts, are felony threes, the most serious, and then there's some misdemeanors as well. But the felony threes statutorily are punishable by up to 7 years in prison. Now, a lot of these would merge for purposes of sentencing, but this is a very serious situation and a very serious crime. So if you began to add these up one after the other, you could do a significant amount of jail time as a result of this if you were convicted or pled guilty.
Are we talking about potentially decades?
Well, yeah, you could be, depending on how this case proceeded. Now, it's my understanding that the defendant is cooperating, and that's always going to work in favor of a defendant in a case. If you were to go to trial and you were to be convicted, and the court could sentence you in some of these instances consecutively, which means one sentence after the other. So you complete one sentence and then you begin the other. Yeah, you could see a sentence that would be decades long in a case like this.
Now, one of the charges was corruption of minors. Can you break down just what exactly that means and how serious is a charge like that one?
Well, it's a serious charge, and it's a felony three based on the circumstances here, and it's essentially just as the statute says that you've done something, you've exposed something to or furnished something to a juvenile that has caused them some harm. So in a lot of instances, we see this charge attached on to other charges, like we do in this case, and sexual contact, furnishing marijuana. So this is just something that the Pennsylvania legislature has made clear that if you're going to involve juveniles in this type of conduct, there's a charge specifically geared for that.
And what does delivery of a controlled substance mean in this context?
Well, that's what's interesting because a lot of times people think when they hear delivery of a controlled substance that there has to be selling of that. And that's not the case. So you can be convicted of delivery just by furnishing drugs to another person. Now, in this instance, it's furnishing drugs to a juvenile, and that's what gives way not only to the distribution charge, but also the corruption of minors charge.
And I looked it up. It says that the age of consent in Pennsylvania is 16 years old. The alleged victim is 16. So, how does that impact the case legally?
It doesn't, okay? Because what's happening here is there's a charge of institutional sexual assault. And that means that if you're in a position of power over a person, like a prison guard, it doesn't matter if you're a prison guard and an inmate agrees consensually to have sex with you, that's still a crime because you have this power over that individual. That's the same thing that exists here. So there's a specific charge under the institutional sexual assault statute that refers to schools. And if you're an employee of a school, a teacher, a custodian, an administrator, you have this authority over that student. And so that student can never consent to sex with someone who's in that position. So even though this student would be 16 years old, he cannot consent to a sexual encounter with a teacher or school employee.
And that's great to know because I know that's a question on a lot of people's minds. Like, if he's 16, then what's so wrong with it? If he, if this happened, because this is all alleged, but if he agreed to it, then what's the big deal? So, if he takes the stand per se, consent couldn't really be a defense, correct?
Well, no, no. If he takes the stand and he says, "Hey, I consented to this. I wanted to be with her. I was in love with her," and we've seen cases like that um, in the past. That doesn't matter because under the law, because of that power differential, because she's a teacher and he's a student, he cannot consent. So even legally he cannot consent. So yeah, he could say I wanted to be with her, but it doesn't matter. She has crossed the line that provides that even a willing partner cannot be involved in an encounter when there's that power differential, whether it's a teacher student or a guard prisoner, very similar circumstances.
What legal obligations do schools have to prevent situations like this?
Well, obviously, you're going to scrutinize the people that you hire in terms of their background and want to know as much as you can about them. But I think, what happened here is, word came about that there may be some sort of sexual contact or inappropriate contact between a teacher and a student. And I think they acted immediately. It wasn't as though this is something that they've been hearing about for a couple of weeks and decided they were going to look into it. That's not the way I understand this scenario. As soon as they learned that there might be an inappropriate situation, they investigated. They called in the police. The police investigated the district attorney's office, and this matter resulted in an arrest very quickly, or at least a criminal complaint being filed very quickly after first learning about this situation. But it's difficult. I mean, time and time again, this isn't like the first time, our jaw drops and says, "Wow, I can't believe this happened." This happens too often, and we see it over and over and over again. You wonder, what these adults are thinking. I mean, haven't they seen scenarios like this on the news? Haven't they read about them on the internet? That all of a sudden you could think, well, I could get away with this and no one's ever going to find out. That's what always, for me is shocking. How could you do that?
Absolutely. And, the prosecution, they are saying that they have evidence. So let's get into that. What role does digital evidence play in proving these charges? So, the alleged texts, Snapchat messages.
Well, we know, Kennedy, in all these cases that we follow here, that there's always this digital footprint. We're always looking at communications between people. We're always looking at video cameras, whether they're in neighborhoods or they're doorbell cameras of neighbors. And once the police get working at it and investigators begin to canvass neighborhoods, you never know what you're going to find. You may find people coming in and out of a house that where these alleged assaults occurred. So there's so much there. And as I understand it, in this situation, and again, these are all allegations, but apparently the teacher was texting the student while the police were interviewing him. Listen, texting between teacher and student is inappropriate conduct in and of itself. That's why you have different applications that let coaches or choir directors communicate with all students all at once. So there isn't this interaction sort of on the side between coach and player, student and musical director. So there's apps in place that prevent that kind of contact. So just that in and of itself is inappropriate.
Absolutely. And police also, they're alleging that some of the alleged sexual incidents happened at the suspect's parents' home. Could the teacher's parents face legal trouble for the alleged incidents happening at their residence?
Well, that's a good question, Kennedy, and I think we've seen more and more of parents being responsible for the conduct of their children, but here we're talking about an adult child, 35 years old, living with her parents. From what I've read, the student has described her bedroom at her parents' home to further substantiate these allegations. Um, I would think that there would be little chance that the parents of an adult would be responsible in any way, unless, of course, they condoned it or made it possible that this conduct could occur, and they knew that this was a situation where the person who was coming to the residence was a student of hers, and that this conduct was not only inappropriate but illegal. I mean, that would be um, that would be a stretch, but we know that prosecutors have successfully put together cases against parents who were blind to the circumstances that were going on, whether it was a school shooting or other serious criminal matter.
What about the school or the district? Could they face liability if it's shown that they overlooked any warning signs?
Well, that would be an interesting investigation as well. So I believe that if the district acted as soon as they learned that there may be something inappropriate going on, if they acted immediately, then I think they've done what they were supposed to do. Now, if there was some inappropriate conduct, in the past that was known to the district, and the district hired this person anyway, could that lead to some additional responsibility here? We don't know. We're speculating about that. But I would say, at least at the outset, from what I've read, if the district acted immediately, then they did everything that they could in their power under the circumstances to intervene.
Right. And it appears as if the district immediately placed that teacher on leave. What is the significance of that? Just, getting her out of the classroom immediately, telling her that she's not allowed to come back on campus.
Well, that's certainly the right thing to do, and unfortunately, um, that at times has to be a response, even when you're unsure that anything inappropriate even occurred, because the school district's responsibility is to the students and the safety of the students. So no one is ever in that position of authority as a school administrator, a superintendent, even a school board, going to let somebody remain there while a matter is being investigated. So that's something that happens frequently under a lot of different circumstances, because school districts are very cautious about exposing their children, their students, to any sort of danger if they think that might be the case.
What's the arrangement process? What happens after she turns herself in?
Well, apparently the criminal complaint has been filed in this case, but she has not had her preliminary arraignment, which is the first step in the process in Pennsylvania. And as I understand it, she had some medical situation that prevented her from being arrested and taken into custody immediately. And as I understand, she is making arrangements through counsel to turn herself in. Now, the district attorney has said that he intends to ask for a high uh, bond when she does turn herself in. So the first step in this preliminary arraignment is to set a bond and to make sure that the defendant understands what the charges are against them or her, and knows that they have the right to retain counsel, and schedules a preliminary hearing. So at this preliminary arraignment, those are the things that are going to occur.
How long could a case like this take to even get to trial?
Well, that's there are a lot of different factors that play into that. So after this preliminary hearing, preliminary arraignment, what's going to happen is they're going to schedule a preliminary hearing in front of a magistrate, a probable cause hearing to determine whether there's sufficient evidence for the case to go forward. Then, once you get up to the court of common pleas, as it's called in Pennsylvania, the trial court, then there are pretrial motions that can certainly slow a case down. Hearings will have to be scheduled, evidence would have to be produced, and ultimately a judge would have to decide those preliminary motions. And then ultimately the case would be placed on the trial list. Depending on how involved that those preliminary or pretrial motions are, it could take months and months and months for those to be resolved. On the other hand, sometimes you have a cooperating defendant, allegedly. There's the idea that maybe that's going to lead to a plea. That could certainly shorten the period of time. But sometimes these cases can take months and months and months to resolve because of a lot of different things that can come up during the course of preparation for trial.
And what about federal charges? Could federal charges ever come into play in a case like this?
Well, I think it would be unlikely. This is the type of case that is uh, particularly in the domain of the state courts. Um, if there was any, this is Westchester County, which is in southeastern Pennsylvania near Philadelphia. If there would be some suggestion that um, this juvenile was taken to out of state, to Delaware or Maryland or Virginia or something like that, that could create some sort of federal jurisdiction. You could really stretch it and say, well, school districts get federal funding and somehow it's a federal case. But at least in my experience, these types of cases have remained in state hands for state prosecution.
And I just have to ask before I let you go, if you were her defense attorney, how would you fight this?
Well, the first thing you have to see in the case like this is how much evidence there is. What is there that supports these allegations, and has my client admitted that she's responsible in a case like this? Those are factors that really make a difference in determining how you're going to proceed. Did she make a statement to the police, and those sort of things? Now, absent those things, if I were defending a case like this, I mean, I would be looking at how the case was built, looking at whether there was evidence that was confiscated, without a warrant, statements made without being Mirandized. Those are all things that you could, take a very close look at, and then suggest that maybe some of that evidence can't be used because her constitutional rights were violated. So there's a lot to look at early on in the case to make a decision strategically about how you're going to proceed.
But could that work if, like how we said, police are claiming that while they were interviewing the victim, she was texting him in that moment? So how exactly do you fight that?
Well, yeah, I mean, those are good questions, and the issue is, how did you determine that? Did the juvenile provide his phone? Did you ask for consent to look at his phone? Did you get a search warrant to get his phone before you looked at it? When it comes to her phone, did you was she in some sort of custodial situation when the phone was pulled over? Did she turned over? Was she, when she talked to police, was she advised of her rights and she was in a custodial interrogation and she hadn't been Mirandized? So those are all things that have to be looked at very closely before you can make any kind of decision strategically about how you're going to proceed.
Absolutely. Well, this is a case that we will be following. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
According to WCAU, Mercogliano had an emergent medical issue that kept her from being immediately arrested. The DA says they plan on seeking a high bail. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.